Welcome to the Banner of Truth magazine podcast, where each week we bring you selected content from the magazine for your encouragement and edification. Many of you will know that the Banner of Truth was set up as a charitable trust, and as such we have trustees who are responsible for the overall running of the organization, its legalities, its finances, and above all else, its stewardship of theological resources for the sake of the church. Having said that, in keeping with our modus operandi, the trustees are not to the front and center of many of our communications, and as such, the Banner of Truth trustees can be shrouded in a certain air of mystery. And so, for that reason, it is always good to sit down with a trustee to find out a bit more about their backstory, what brought them into the work of the Banner of Truth Trust, and also to probe them about some of their favorite Banner books. And that's what we're going to do in this bonus episode of the magazine podcast. We're going to sit down with Dr. Robert Strivens, who in one part of his working life is moving on to new pastures, although he will remain a trustee of the Banner of Truth Trust. Here then is an interview we recorded with Robert at the recent Banner of Truth UK Ministers' Conference in Staffordshire. So Robert, one thing I know about you is that you've done a number of different things in your working life. Could you tell us a bit about first of all, your conversion and how you came to know the Lord?
Yeah. I was converted at school. I don't know quite when, but as a teenager. I went to schools where there were a number of evangelical teachers. So we had good scripture lessons at school, but particularly a couple of maths teachers. I don't know why maths was so significant, but maths teachers, I liked maths, who were Christians and who were actively, in a good way, actively evangelistic amongst the students, in ways perhaps you couldn't be these days. But they organised meetings, and I went along to one of those and professed faith. I'm not sure it was genuine at that point. It was sincere, but I don't know that it resulted in much fruit at that point. But a little later in my teenage years, certainly came under conviction of sin and was converted, and the scriptures seemed suddenly to come to life. And there was a change in my life. I wasn't well taught after that, particularly. I wasn't encouraged to find a good church. The importance of church wasn't really part of what I heard, for better or worse. So that was a problem, and I drifted really at university into a less than helpful, charismatic, Pentecostal type of group. The one good thing that came out of that was I found a wife. So that was wonderful and still is. But eventually, after we'd got married and our first child was on the way, we were moving out of London. I was working in London as a solicitor. We decided to move out of London. And by God's providence, in an unusual way, we ended up in a town where there was a good Reformed church. We knew nothing about Reformed churches or Reformed theology or anything of that sort, but by God's providence, that's where we ended up, and began to hear good, solid Reformed preaching for the first time, and it again transformed our lives. It really did. The doctrine of justification by faith alone, which I'd believed, but I hadn't really understood and therefore hadn't really grasped and internalized properly, came very powerfully. I remember one Sunday morning listening. We'd been there about 6 months, and really suddenly just coming to a realization: this salvation that I have is free to me. It was costly to Christ, but it is appropriated by faith alone, and it lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. Certainly the movement we had been in imposed great burdens, unintentionally, but gave the impression that if you wanted God's blessings, you had to work for it, you had to earn it. Through how you worshipped and how you behaved and so on. But so this was extraordinary and wonderful. And then the pastor, Bob Sheehan, began to, there were a number of us younger men in the congregation, encouraged us to begin to read and study. He set up a monthly Saturday morning class for men who were interested. I went to that. So through those means, I began to be introduced to Reformed theology books, and it was a really formative time.
That's wonderful to hear. I believe we've read an article from Bob Sheehan on the podcast before, so I'll link to that in the show notes, and so people can follow up on that.
Good. Yeah.
So you've had an interesting journey since then, vocationally. You, I presume, at this point were already in the world of law. Is that right?
Yeah, I was practicing law in London,
Yep.
in the city, and I did that for nearly 15 years. But increasingly, Bob Sheehan was encouraging me and others to think about ministry. I felt a call to minister, to preach, and that culminated in my leaving legal practice, going to London Seminary, London Theological Seminary as it then was, to study. Sadly, for us at least, that was the point at which Bob was taken to glory. Suddenly had a brain hemorrhage and died, which was obviously a great shock. And I'd been looking forward to having his mentorship while I was training. He'd also been due to start lecturing at the seminary in New Testament, so none of that happened. I went off to seminary and did the 2-year course there, but that was a wonderful time.
And obviously you'd had quite an encounter with Reformed theology, presumably over good few years at the church. Yeah. What did training mean for you as you prepared for ministry? How did you find it helped you?
It was just an opportunity to give myself full time to study these things, and do so in a depth and detail you can't possibly do, I think, unless you give up time to do it. And I was there at a time when there were a number of other men similar age and kind of who'd also given up careers in other areas to come and train, and so there were half a dozen of us or so together who we got to know one another well. That's an important part, I think, of my seminary training. I think with the demise of residential training today, men maybe miss out on that to some extent, or maybe they compensate in other ways, but it was a valuable part of the training, an important part, I think. And the relationship with the lecturers as well, not just in lectures, but at other times, being able to talk, tap into their knowledge and wisdom and experience is very, very valuable.
Now, not quite sure of the chronology, so you have to help me, but you, your subsequent ministry has interweaved pastoral work and training, and for a time you were principal at London Seminary. How has that interweaving happened, and how have each of those aspects helped the other one?
Well, it was all very unexpected. From seminary, I was called as pastor of Banbury Evangelical Free Church, so we moved to Banbury. I expected just to stay there till I retired. Had no ambition to do anything else. I just loved being in pastoral ministry. Banbury was a great place to be. Loved the church, wonderful people. But after, I can't remember when, but after a few years, I was asked if I would start teaching Greek at the seminary. I'd studied Greek at school, and so I started to do that, and then I started to teach 1 or 2 New Testament classes. And then one day I had a phone call from the then principal, effectively asking if I would consider succeeding him. He was due to retire. Philip was due to retire. It came completely out of the blue. I was shocked. I didn't know quite what to say. But in the end, after much discussion with my wife and many others, we accepted. So that took us back to London for 10 years, 9 or 10 years. I was there for 10 years, nine as principal. And then back to pastoral ministry subsequently. So I think in God's providence, you never know how things are going to work out, do you? That each played into the other, each contributed to the other. When I was pastoring and teaching, it was very, very helpful. Each helped the other. Subsequently in pastoral ministry more recently, the fact that I taught New Testament for more than 10 years was immensely helpful in preaching and pastoring. So I think all these things in God's providence play into one another, contribute.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I want to ask you to say a little bit about your connection with the Banner of Truth. You have been for some years now on the board. What does it mean to be a trustee of the Banner of Truth?
Yeah.
So many of our listeners won't know quite how we work.
Well, the trustees are the body that's ultimately responsible for the entire work of the Banner of Truth. So we have oversight of the finance, the business side, but particularly we take an interest in the books that we're publishing. Obviously that's the heartbeat, that's the substance of what we do. We're responsible for the conferences, so we try to be at the conferences as much as we can, get to know people, talk to people. That's a valuable point at which we can interact with the people we're seeking to serve. And we're very conscious of the, I'm sure we're all very conscious of the privilege of serving as trustee of a work like the Banner of Truth. It's been immensely significant in my development and understanding and ministry for a long time, through the books, through the conferences. And so it's a great privilege to serve as a trustee. It's a bit overawing, really, thinking of its history, the history of the Banner, and those who've been involved and those who started it. It's a tremendous privilege and a wonderful thing that Ian Murray is still a trustee, still active as a trustee. So the opportunity to benefit from his wisdom and experience and to get to know him is tremendous. It's a wonderful thing. I think it is unique. That's an overused word, but I don't know of any other work that's similar, that combine that. Banner is a publisher. That's what we are, a publisher of books. But it's not that. It's a ministry. It really is, and that's an overused word as well. But it throughout, the trustees, the staff, everybody involved, when you talk to them, it's clear that they understand that what we are doing is serving God's people through the books, through the conferences and so on. And that's a wonderful thing to be involved with. It's a great privilege.
That's very helpful. So the life of a trustee is multifaceted. The involvement of the trustees is broad. I just want to highlight that to our readers that the trustees are very much aware of what goes on with the books from the start to the finish. That nothing is published against the will of the trustees, but rather they are commissioning as men who feel a strong sense of pastoral and theological responsibility. So
and all the proposals for manuscripts come before the trustees, which I think is quite unusual now for publishers, but we still do that for the reason you just identified.
Yeah. I think that's good for readers to know, and listeners. And we're going to finish by talking a little bit about two Banner books that you found helpful. But before we do, this is quite a significant year for you because you're finishing at Bradford upon Avon. You've moved to a new part of the country, and I believe that you're about to give your attention to some exciting new projects.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. I've felt for some while that there are things I'd like to write about myself. I don't have the gifts that some have to be able to write and pastor and do everything else all at once. So I've felt for some while it would be good, right, for me, if it's possible, to retire from pastoral ministry. I'm retirement age, as it were, but then to be able to give myself and my energies to continuing to lecture and teach, as I do on a number of ministerial training courses, but also to give substantial time to writing. So with some others, we've set up a new institution that we're calling the Reformed Baptist Study Centre. There's a website under that name, and the aim of that is to encourage Baptists in particular, but evangelicals generally, to serious study of history, theology, in order to inform our faith, our ministry, our service today, in contemporary society today. So that's the aim, and we'll pursue that through my teaching and lecturing ministry. We'll, I hope, be holding study days and seminars and so on around the country, which will open up different aspects of theology and church history, I hope in a helpful way, for ministers and for others who are interested, and also give me opportunity to write.
Yeah. Well, that sounds very exciting. Will it have a physical location, or will it
not
be,
initially?
No?
We don't have the funds at the moment for a physical location. We hope that might be the case in due course, but no. Initially, it'll be a case of travelling around from place to place and finding good locations for events. But I'm looking forward to it very much in this new phase, and I'm looking to the Lord that we would be a blessing to God's people.
Well, that sounds most exciting, and we'll make sure we link to the Reformed Baptist Study Centre with this episode. And if that sounds like something you might be interested in finding out more about, do pursue the links, watch out for study days, and look out for things.
You can sign up on the website for updates and news and so on.
Brilliant, we'll do that. Well, in closing, Robert, you've kindly picked out two titles from the banner backlist. Could you tell us what these books have meant to you?
Sure, there are three actually.
Three, sorry, I can't see one.
No, well, no, there aren't three here, there are two here. There is a third, which I couldn't find. But I think two authors have been very significant for me from the start, coming into contact with Reformed theology. One is Dr. Lloyd Jones, discovering his expositions of Romans, his writings. So the volume I haven't got that I couldn't find is his volume on the Puritans, their origins and successors, I think it's called. All those writings gripped me. They just gripped me. I remember I worked in Brussels for a while with my law firm and used to travel in on the bus into the centre of Brussels to the office, and I would sit there with my volume of Lloyd Jones on Ephesians 5, I think it was, just engaged with it. It was wonderful. So that's been really, really significant. And alongside his publications, the writings of Ian Murray have been tremendously influential. So the volume I've got here is his life of Lloyd Jones. In fact, I read the two volumes, of which this is a kind of condensation, and I'd encourage anybody who can to read the two volumes. I think it was Bob Sheehan who recommended them to me, and he said, if you're going to understand evangelicalism today, and he meant at the end of the 20th century, but I think it still applies, if you're going to understand evangelicalism today, you've got to read these volumes, and I think that is true. So they're inspiring in their own right, but also give us real insight into why things are the way they are in evangelicalism today. So that's a couple of volumes. And then John Murray has been very influential and formative. So his little volume, Redemption Accomplished and Applied, I read fairly early on in these years, and again, very formative in my in helping to understand the kind of structure of salvation from a biblical and theological standpoint. So it's not a book you can read, in an afternoon. It's a sort of book you have to really get to grips with and read things twice and, take it slowly, but it amply repays careful reading and study.
That's really helpful, really helpful. So 3 titles there to consider. Puritans, their origins and successors. Ian H. Murray's 2-volume history of the life of Martin Lloyd-Jones, and also the 1 volume. And then there's John Murray's Redemption Accomplished and Applied. So thank you ever so much, Robert, for being with us.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we're looking forward to hearing more about the study centre and all that the Lord has for you in this next season.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Banner of Truth magazine podcast. To subscribe to the magazine in print or digital formats, or both, see the show notes or visit banneroftruth.org.